Hi, I'm Danny Neon and I'm a visual artist. I've been living here in Walthamstow in London for about nearly 5 years, and before that had been living down in Cornwall in St Ives for about 10 years, where probably it was the first time since my degree that I'd actually been able to fully concentrate on my work. Now I'm going to show you some of that work around the house, some old work, some new work, and talk about how I've had to adapt to life under the lockdown. Okay? Okay, this is a really old bit of work. There was it was a series of about sort of 8 or 9 of them little boxes. It was while I was doing my degree. It's that old, and it was made up with stuff that I found when I was in my summer job at a large plant nursery, and one of my jobs was weeding out of the gravel, and as you pulled up every single weed, the entire root system would come up, and it was just amazingly beautiful. But they were also dismantling a lot of the greenhouses, and there was this glass that had sort of decades and decades of green gunk sort of built up on it, and I was able to take quite a few of those sheets of glass home and then made these little boxes with the plant, and which then would be photocopied and then photocopied again, and then the plant itself was pressed between the bits of glass, and then there were little maps behind each one which which sort of denoted various journeys that I'd had to take in my life. So that's the only one I've got. That one I deliberately kept because it was my favourite one. It was the first one, and yeah, so it's kind of special. It's a really early old box of mine, so that's quite cool. I like that. Okay, this is called He-Man and Battle Cat, and again it was like a made up version of my life, I suppose. You know, it has a little label in it saying, "I don't have any money to buy toys, Daniel, age 37 and a half," and it was creating this sort of like alternate me where my life was so terrible and disgusting that, you know, as my peers around me in the playground were playing with their toys and talking about TV shows that they'd watched, I didn't have a TV, I didn't have toys to play with. I would have to, you know, sort of grab around in rubbish to find things to make and turn into toys, and that was my kind of, that's all I had to give me any joy, really. So I'm just getting a bit emotional now. Going on from that one, this I only made at the end of last year, I think, and it was very similar. I was just walking down Palmerston Road, and in the bushes there was this homemade bong type thing, and it still had the liquid in it, and it was so disgusting, and I immediately thought, that is so disgusting, and I sort of carried on walking a bit, and then looked around me, saw a plastic bag and thought, I'm having that, that's coming home with me. And I kind of looked at it and I just thought, it looks like a really shit Dalek, and I thought, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a Dalek, in the same way as the He-Man and Battle Cat toys. I was going to make this into my own toy, again made out of the detritus of everyday shit that you just find in the street. And then I thought, yeah, but it's too simplistic. I need to do something, even though I don't like adding a lot. So I then ended up nipping into the Checkers and going down all the ashtrays and finding all these cigarette butts, because I thought they were perfect for the little spherical things around the bottom of the Dalek. It was a bit weird. I think they thought I was homeless, so I kept having people asking, you know, offering me full packets of cigarettes or tobacco. But I don't even smoke, so it was a bit weird. But I kind of love it. It's my little Dalek made out of a shitty bong and a load of dog ends.
Hi, I'm Darcy Peyton Barnard. Hi, I'm Molly Energy.
And together,
We are
Creative Vandalism. You may be wondering, what is creative vandalism? What we are is a small group of artists and writers who are passionate about DIY, independent media production. And we make all sorts of stuff, from comics to films, and we're even going to try and make some video games at some point in the future. Yeah, that's basically who we are and what we're about.
This piece, I'm Not Just a Mother, was originally just going to be a photographic piece, but we also then turned it into a performance and farewell to St Ives in my studio in St Ives on the Porthmere Studios, and it was it was basically about me being a single parent, bringing up a kid on my own, having to do all the, do everything, sort of create this sort of father figure, a mother figure, whatever the hell they are anyway. So this was almost like a piss take out of those roles. So that was me. There was this old milk churn thing, not milk churn, but where the milk goes in after it's come out of the cows. It's still hanging up above my bed. I don't know whether you saw it earlier. And it was dirty, it was filthy. I'd made these got these old pipes, these rubber pipes that were, every time you touch them your hands got filthy, and I just sort of gaffer taped them to my breasts, my sort of big heavy milk laden breasts. So the whole point of it was, I was in the bed, there was dirty and smelly, everything was grubby. So basically I was doing my best at being a single parent, but as all parents, and maybe a little bit more single parents, you always think that you are just a complete failure. So this was me exaggerating my failure as a parent, really. But yeah, it was quite an eventful performance as well, where I had to be sort of slowly getting drunk throughout the evening as well. And Darcy was dressed in a large nappy and drinking Baileys, I remember, I think, yeah.
So in terms of how much lockdown has impacted our working, we've been completely unable to film the first episode of our web series, The Stew. We'd done test footage of it for last year. We'd done a sort of I guess you'd call it a concept trailer. We had cast our two lead actors, and we were sort of showing testing how they would interact with each other, whether they had good chemistry, which they did, luckily. And we'd sort of been prepping ourselves to get ready to film. So we were going to be entering pre-production March and be filming in May. So in March, the plan was we were going to get sets sorted out, so location scouting. We were in talks with some actors to fill in parts for the roles. We were going to be sorting out, because obviously our web series has some special effects sets, so we were going to be getting our friend Roger McTodd, who's also showcased on the E17 art trail in years past. He does puppets and special effects. We were going to be liaising with him in order to get the locations scouted and then remade in model form, so that we could do things like blow them up or whatever we needed for that particular episode. And then we got sick, and that was March 16th, I think we got sick. Lockdown started a bit earlier for us. So we were already isolating, and it hit me quite badly because I've got asthma.
So when lockdown actually happened, I was down in Cornwall working. I was decorating Hale Harbour offices. So I came back home to experience lockdown in London. the sort of epicenter of England's outbreak. And I came back. I'd been away for 2 weeks, and so Darcy and Molly had been here, looking after the house. They'd apparently not been well, and therefore, apparently that was a good enough excuse for the house to not be very tidy. Look, it's really not that bad. Like that on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 7, which to most people is a perfectly normal and livable amount of mess. Most people? Well, I'm not most people. 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10 is when you start to tidy up and you look around and go, oh, it's 7 out of 10, this is messy, I better start tidying up. So we didn't know how long this was going to go on for. We didn't know anything. It was just like for everybody a completely unknown thing. So very early on we kind of had thought we wanted to try and keep some routine of our normal life. So most Fridays, if we're not doing anything else, therefore most Fridays, we end up at the Victoria on High Street and we do karaoke. And we thought, oh my goodness, how are we gonna cope not doing karaoke? So we thought, do you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna do karaoke here. So we started doing that from the very first Friday, except we had quite a few technical issues. My amp, for some reason, kept overheating continually. And okay, yeah, it's on top of the beer fridge. So that, I thought maybe that's why. Fridges are hot, the amp's on top of that. There was then the record player was on. It's an old amp, so I thought, okay, let's get some air flowing around it. So decided to make a shelf to put the record player on. And I thought, yeah, okay, let's make this record player shelf look nice. So I sort of decoupaged it with one of Darcy's comics that had got water damaged. And then obviously it was just a piece of MDF that I had lying around for, as I have so much just stuff lying around everywhere. It looked really ugly on the front of it. And I thought, what can I do? What can I do to the front that's going to look really nice? And then I remembered years ago when we were in St Ives, I did a computer table that I'd made inside a fireplace. And the front of it, I had just stuck a tape measure, the old cloth tape measures, builders tape measures, sort of vintage ones. And I just so happened to have one, sort of a very, very long vintage builders tape, and I thought I'm going to stick that on it. But I thought I've got loads of time. So the morning I decided to do it, I thought Darcy and Molly aren't up, they're still asleep. I'm going to keep myself occupied. So I decided to have the tape measure go around the entire house at that level of the shelf. So I started off in the corner of the room, had it go across the door. Then I had to remove all the DVDs that were on the shelf because it had to go behind where all the DVDs were. It then had to come round to the unit here, the bookshelves, and I thought, I don't want it just going right round the back. I want it coming around each section of the shelving. So I had to then have it coming in and out and then through and back, and then finally it came to the shelf. Went along the shelf, carried on going around across the fireplace, behind the television, across the windows, behind the aquarium, behind more shelving, across the back wall, and that was it. The room had been completely tape measured. But there was still loads left, so it was like, okay, let's just keep on going down the hall. So that kept me busy for about a day. I then did a few more little creative projects. We have a ridiculous amount of bottle caps that are just sort of slowly filling up this great big vase. And I thought, what can we do with those? So I then started to decorate the fire surround with the bottle caps, the legs of our lovely new sofa. I decorated with the bottle caps. I made a nice checkers board out of bottle caps. I then found some mirrors that were from old wardrobe doors and decorated those with old tape magazines. And then also found a huge bag of colour slides that I'd found in a skip, and they'd just been sitting in a bag for, I don't know, 2 years. And there's one thing in this house that I detest, and I'm almost embarrassed about when people come around, is the disgust. Because it's a rented property. There's not much. You sort of deal with what you've got. But the lampshade in the living room, I had acute embarrassment about it. I don't know why. It was just to me, it was a disgusting thing, and it was a thing that ruined the whole vibe of the house, and but there was nothing I could do about it. So then I thought, no, sod it. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make some lampshades out of these slides, and I love my lampshade. It's one of my favourite things in the room at the moment. And did various things like that just to keep myself being creative. It kind of got me on a roll so that I could eventually actually start making some work. But before I could get on with making work, I knew my room where I was working didn't really work properly as a successful studio space. It was just not organised very well. So I thought, alright, that's my next project, is completely move everything around in my bedroom so that it actually becomes a proper working area. And that was my next thing.
When lockdown happened, we couldn't meet up with anybody for production meetings. We couldn't do any location scouting because we couldn't go out more than once a day except to exercise. Couldn't meet with any actors to cast them, to do auditions. Couldn't meet up with anybody to get permissions for filming locations. None of it could happen. So it kind of all went out the window. And then it's been a bit difficult trying to sort of get back into the swing of things to set up production for a later date, because we don't really know realistically how we can film and socially distance with actors who need to interact with each other, as well as how bustling it can be on a film set when people are doing different things and somebody's holding a boom mic and things need to be moved around. We need to do close, like we can't socially distant we can't have social distancing realistically on a film set. And the other knock-on effect was because it took a little while for furlough to come through for us. We work in public service industries, that's why we got sick quite quickly before it went into lockdown, because when you work in a customer-facing role as your day job and you get sick a lot more often, you therefore have less time to do arts work. So we had to end up dipping into the kitty of money that we'd made from doing comic book sales, which was not a massive amount of money as it was, but when you're on minimum wage, like that's the difference between eating and not eating. So we had to dip into the money that was sort of going to be earmarked to be sort of set aside specifically for production, for things like hiring costumes and hiring sets and things like that, paying actors. So we'd lost that, and as a result what has happened is we've had to shift our focus. So we were going to be filming, we can't do that, so we've shifted focus to the comic series Wasteland Beyond the Wall. So Darcy's been working really hard, tidying up scripts, planning stuff for future as the series goes on. The hiatus has kind of been resulting in us more focusing on the comic just because it's what we can do in this current time and what we will feasibly be able to do while social distancing is still in act, because we can't guarantee people's safety. We're not going to film. Like, we want people to be safe. We want ourselves to be safe. We still don't really know if you can catch coronavirus twice or not, so I need to make sure that for myself I'm not putting myself at risk, because I was really struggling with being able to breathe. Luckily I didn't have to go to hospital, but it was kind of a bit touch and go there. So for now we're focusing on just getting the comic done and planning as much as we can for when we can do filming. So yeah.
Well, these guys, these little heads, they probably are my favourite thing, maybe, at the moment. I don't know, for a long time. They're little dolls' heads, and I replaced all their hair with burnt matches. So, obviously, the different size heads give the illusion of different lengths of hair and different hairstyles. But again, it's kind of like, I don't know, I have this weird thing about things not fulfilling their, wanting to fulfill their designed purpose or destiny, but ultimately always failing. And that's what's happening with these dolls. Because a doll, they just want to be held and played with and hugged and, you know, all those sort of nice things. But these ones, they've got hair made out of burnt matches, so they've suddenly become really, really brittle. So even though they desperately want to be held, they can't. You know, if you do try and hold them, and you were sort of cradling them in your arm like you would with a little dolly, then their hair is all going to get broken. You know, and you might think, oh, that's really sad, but it might be sad, but it also may be like they're ridiculously vain, and it's like, you know, oh, don't touch me, because you're going to ruin my hair. This is one of my ideal wife prototypes. There are a few of them. This is the only one that's left, and it's made out of an old floor polisher. So it's got like the two rotating polishers, and they were all kind of 1950s, 1960s labour-saving devices for the ladies, obviously to make their life easier after, you know, whilst looking after their husbands while their husbands were busy at work. And I kind of wanted to create these sort of ideal wife prototypes, so they were practical, but they were also ridiculously sexy. You know, it was the kind of, you know, whore in bed, etc., etc. type thing. And there was a male one as well. There is a male one, which was like a handheld Hoover, but he was like placed in a box, and the cabling had been sort of intertwined in and out of the box and the plug removed. So, you know, even though he was capable of performing these duties, he had made himself quite impotent, and therefore had to let everyone else go around and do all these jobs for him. Even though he could do it if he wanted to, but, you know, men. So this plane here was part of a series which was just called Tool, obviously because of the various connotations that the word tool has. And there was probably about 26 overall, I think, and they were all sort of antique, or whatever you want, vintage wooden tools that all of them had been carved into and then placed inside the little boxes of them, either dead insects or what's the proper word? Feces, yeah. Feces of various animals, but mainly dead insects. But it was always it had to be insects that you just found lying around on the floor, if you know what I mean, or in the windowsill. It was never going to be beautiful or pretty, colourful with iridescent wings or beetles with amazing what have yous on them. You know, it was unfortunately quite a few bumblebees, flies, hornets, dragonflies, just that I would find on my sort of walks. And this one is owl pellets, so they're kind of the pellets that the owl has then thrown up, sort of labelled. They're all labelled in there. And here we've got an owl pellet that's been taken apart, so you can see all the bones of whatever it was that was in there, and there's all the fur is on the top here. There was one that it was just hamster poos, and that was really. There was one that was caterpillar poos. That was pretty darn impressive. And the whole point of them was kind of like all of us have aspects of ourselves that we don't like, that we think are ugly or we think are horrible, and we don't want anyone to see, and they're kind of, we hide them away. And but the reality is those things still make us who we are, you know. And then, you know, sort of, you might have a lisp, or you got a bit of a fat tummy like me, you know, but other people, and you think, oh, that's what makes me disgusting, and I hate it, and I don't want anyone to see it. And then other people go, you know, that's just part of you, that's part of your character, and it's why we love you. So these were kind of me trying to allow the bits of myself out that I didn't like and I didn't really want people to see, so they were sort of hidden away, and I was trying to show them. So all the tools were ultimately still completely usable, I think, you know, but then there was these horrible bits that were put on display, and the reality was, when you looked at them, they were ridiculously beautiful. They were, even though they were sort of dull, boring, brown insects, etc., etc., they were still beautiful.
So apart from us making films, most of what we do at home anyway, so we haven't really had to make any changes in terms of workspace for the lockdown, because like I say, apart from filming, most of what we do is writing and drawing, and should we be brave enough to try and do some video games, coding, which, you know, is done on computers, and comic books are drawn on paper mostly, some digital, but I do work mostly with pen and paper for the comic books and scan them in digitally and do them. I tend to do that here in this little corner that I've got set up on the table. Laptop's there at the moment because I was playing video games earlier, which is technically work, it's research. But yeah, I tend to sit here, I draw, I've got some sketchbooks piled up over there. I tend to work, in terms of doing digital art, I do mostly concept art, early stages concept art digitally, just because it's easy to edit it. You know, if you get a design wrong, you can, instead of having to draw it over and over again and improving on the design, you can just change it then and there. Once I'm happy with design, I tend to then do a nice sketch of it with pen and paper, just because I feel, I mean, this isn't actually probably true, but I just feel like you can get more detail actually drawing it, and you get more control when it's there in front of you with a pen and a pencil. And that's also how I do the actual comic book making itself. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the actual original drawings for the first chapter of Creative Vandalism's debut comic book. But I did find instead the drawings from the original prototype I made for it back in 2016. So yeah, here are like the original drawings, and then I scan them in onto the computer, and then I colour them in digitally, which then, and here is Creative Vandalism's debut comic book, issue 1 of the Wasteland Beyond the Wall. And yeah, so it's all colours, all coloured in, but digitally, but drawn with pen and paper. Yeah. You can read this on our website, by the way. We were going to have it in some comic book shops. We did sell a few copies at a little launch party we did as well at the Victoria in Walthamstow, which is unfortunately also closed due to lockdown. But yeah, sold a few copies there, and then we were getting a few in some comic book shops, which would have been great for us. And then the comic book shops shut. That's a real tongue twister, that, for lockdown as well. We got a couple of copies in one, and then the others didn't get back to us. Yeah, well, a couple were like, oh, we'll have a read of it, and then we'll think about it, but this looks really good, and then they all shut, so then we didn't hear anything. And the 3 copies that we did get stocked. Who knows what happened, because they're shut.
Now this chap is one of a triptych. The other 2 in the hallway, we'll see him in a minute. And they were kind of like these 3 children that had been kidnapped as babies and then adapted and added to and enhanced in various ways to do what, I have absolutely no idea. I'm not even really that bothered, but you know, there was obviously something quite dark. I mean, this is a lovely 1940s vibrator instead of an arm, and a nice gas mask, etc, and rivets, blah 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 in the arms. And this was like the hero who had managed to escape and was in the middle of trying to sort of plan how to rescue all the other sort of lost children, as it were. So these are the other 2 of the triptych that I was talking about earlier on. So this is his confidant. This is like the protagonist's confidant, who listens to his problems, etc, etc, etc. And this would be, what's that one called?
The antagonist?
The antagonist. That's it. And this is the antagonist of the protagonist. And kind of, they're very similar in a way. They obviously have been adapted and mutilated, etc, etc, to whatever. But this, and it is kind of, they've just both forked off into different ways, if you know what I mean. You know, either one could have become either one. It's just, you know, depending on their circumstances. You know, so that's these guys. And over here is the Peter and Jane series, which is kind of, is almost where my work kind of went off on a slightly different tangent. We just had a fire in the kitchen above my studio. There was where my studio was at the time. It was below a restaurant, and just below the kitchens, and they'd had a huge fire. And my whole studio got gutted. A lot of stuff got ruined. Lots of books got ruined. Thankfully, all my actual work was out at an exhibition at the time. And then finally, when I got back in, there was a lot of other stuff going on, and it kind of was quite a cathartic time, and this was quite therapeutic doing this. So it's made up of 3 books. It was like an old Peter and Jane book, a book of British artists, and then a book of 1940s, 50s, very, very tame porn. And what I did was I just kind of cut them all up and created a new story, sort of even within the wording, within the words of the books. I would just change and cut up the letters and create a different narrative that kind of, it's quite dark, and it's probably the darkest thing I ever did. You know, before I had hidden the darkness a lot more, and this time I thought, no, screw it, I'm just gonna say it as it is, really. So it was a turning point, really, where I kind of thought, no, I'm not going to bother pretending anymore and laughing and joking and being, you know, everything's sweet and nice. I'm just going to go, no, sometimes life is pretty shit, but you still have to make the most of it. You can still kind of, I personally still use humour when you know, with any sort of problems that I have, and sort of I use humour to diffuse it and take away the power of these sort of things. And that's what it's. So it's a completely new book, which I did get made into a book. And even though this is quite a few years old, I've never ever shown it except for at Open Studios. Well, no, that's a lie. I showed it once in Cornwall, and within a day and a half there were a lot of complaints, and the place that it was up asked me to take it down. But I still want to show it because I still genuinely love this piece of work, and the book. As a book, it's amazing, and that's the main idea. Is eventually to have the book as the finished piece, which I did do a prototype, and I kind of love it. And it's all tatty, and I scribbled all over it, and it looks really. I love it personally. Yeah.
It was quite annoying though, because like in terms of our online following, which at the moment is basically just our friends and family who have been kind enough to like us and follow us, because I mean for the past couple of years we've been at university, so we've been focusing on university projects. Then we graduated in July, and then that's when we decided to then start focusing and being like, right, let's get started on creative vandalism. Had a list of projects that I had ideas for. I'm like, right, let's get them out there. First one was the comic book, just because that was easy to do, because it didn't require getting other people. I just could do it myself, you know. Like because we did exhibit on the previous two Art Trail events for the E17 Art Trail, but we didn't really have much to show. We were showing some of our old like art films that we did at uni, and kind of like concept art for the comic book, but it was more just like, this is what we are going to make, rather than here is our artwork that we have made. But now we've got a comic book. We were going to have a web series, but that's been put on hold, of course. But yeah, because we've still been able to make content during the lockdown, but it's been hard getting it out there and getting people to see it, because it's hard to find random people on the internet to look at your stuff. It's easy to get your friends and family to like and share it, but it doesn't really go past there. Whereas having our work in like an actual shop, random people would have looked at it, and then they might have liked it and bought it, and then followed us on Facebook and Instagram and checked out our website. But now we've just got to wait for this to all blow over.
So, my bedroom, stroke, workroom, studio, whatever you want to call it. Okay, the most important area is my bed, obviously. This is where I do most of my work. It sort of like involves just lying there and thinking about stuff, which is very important. Okay, so therefore this was here anyway, and then over here is my messy bit. This is where if I want to wallop stuff, and it's where I keep stuff, and it's all paint, you know, I can drill things like that, and I can do things like that. Then here is the easel area where I can do big pieces of work, sort of the big drawings and paintings, etc, etc. So here, so I've got the paint, I've got my everything, blah 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 blah, all my materials. Then the drawing board area, which is kind of where I do a lot of the collage work, and that's here. And then my newest bit was creating a little office area and TV watching area. So I have the computer, I have a sofa, I have my beautiful My Little Pony poster to look at behind me, and the TV. And the TV can be used, I can either sit I can sit there and watch stuff, or I can lie in bed and watch stuff. or I can sit here and watch stuff whilst working. And it suddenly became a really enjoyable space to work in that I'd never really had before, because I just never had the time to actually sit down and think about the different areas that I needed. And as soon as I got this set up like this, suddenly I just automatically wanted to make work.
We've also been getting a lot of writing done during lockdown, because I like writing. We both like writing, and you know, we need the ideas there before we can actually make the stuff. So I've written up to like chapter 10 of the comic book now. Got some other scripts done. I don't really have a dedicated workspace for writing. I tend to just lie across whatever sofa is available. Sometimes I sit up, but most of the time I do lie across it, or I lie in bed and write. I don't know, I find it nice to relax whilst doing that sort of thing, because you can just let the ideas flow. I just sit there typing away for several hours. So that's how I write.
Love the fucking hob on again.
So the first thing that I actually started making was I returned to these collages I'd been making a while back, which were just really sort of simplistic collages made up of just two things. And it was like, one was these books that I had found, which were just books on cathedrals. I think they probably date from about the 1940s or so, I suppose. And then cutting and pasting, that someone had given me an obscene amount of old Playboys and Penthouse magazines. So I started just, I like the juxtaposition, even though I hate the word juxtaposition. I liked the way they sort of played with each other, these sort of titillating images, which when you look at them with a modern eye are just ridiculously innocent, but at the time they were kind of saucy, or whatever you want to call it, but then putting them within these like places of worship, and it kind of worked on so many levels. There were so many ways that you could read it, but the difficult thing is here, I know we haven't got much time, is because every single piece of work is related to another one. Sort of, they're like dominoes. They're just a knock-on effect. I mean, these come from these pieces of work, which were the sort of early collages that came out of the Peter and Jane series, where I tried to simplify it and then started drawing them in a very kind of naive way, which then kind of then led me to putting my face on children's sort of, again, 1950s books, kids books about, you know, sort of fab days out for girls and boys, blah 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 type thing. But I'd always then put my face in it, kind of in a very kind of disturbing way, because, you know, and I'd use myself, because, you know, I wanted to make myself the baddie, the evil one, the whatever, you know, just sort of this dark, creepy character, because I'm not. But anyway, and then they led me to start looking into sort of feminist manifestos, and I then got heavily into Valerie Solanas, sort of, in the Scum Manifesto. And even though obviously there's some ridiculous things she says, there's also some very interesting things she says, and she's also a very funny writer. But there was this whole thing about men cannot, you know, it's a contradiction in terms for a man to be an artist, because men are incapable of feeling empathy, therefore they just want to control art because they can't make it, because only women can make art. And therefore, and they sexualize women within their art to try and so another way to kind of keep their control. And I kind of like this idea of myself becoming a disciple of Valerie, and kind of wanting to become this complete female, and because it kind of tied in with what I was doing, so it was like I liked this kind of weird journey that, you know, if I could just become a woman like I was meant to be, like all men were meant to be, you know, and the fact that we're men is just because we're basically failures, then perhaps I can make true art, because that's all I want to do, is make real, deep, meaningful art.
So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about some of our work, namely the Wasteland Beyond the Wall comic book series. It all started in 2016, really, when I made this, which is, well, not this particularly, this is just a test print, it's not the whole thing, but this is all I've got because I gave all the copies away to friends of mine and sold a few. But this is the 2016 prototype. I did it in 2016, which is of course when Trump was doing his election campaign, talking about a Mexican border wall. And I'd had this idea floating around that I wanted to do a sci-fi series that had Americans as the bad guys, and I wanted them to be fascist, I wanted them to be Nazis, I wanted them to wear the swastika proudly. It's kind of an idea I had floating around since the age of 14, really, when I was just tired of seeing America always being the heroes, and I wanted to make them the villains. And then when I started seeing things in American politics, I was like, you know what, they could quite feasibly be fascists, and unfortunately that is now more true, more than ever, really, unfortunately. But that was always kind of the point, was to kind of show America for the dark underbelly, right, if you will. But I wanted it to be pulpy. I wanted it to, even though it's of course a very serious topic that the series kind of does tackle, I wanted it to be pulpy. I mean, everything I kind of write, you could say is pulp. It's ridiculous, over the top nonsense, a lot of it. And I wanted it to be very pulp sci-fi, very tongue placed firmly in cheek. You know, I wanted it to be over the top and a bit silly in places. And I think that's important when dealing with such serious topics. You need to find the humour in it to kind of, almost to take away its power, I guess. So that's what I wanted to do. And then I rewrote the prototype into chapter 1. It went from 16 pages to 40 pages. And what I really focused on was developing the world, even though it's ridiculous and silly and sci-fi. I did want it to be believable at the same time. And I wanted the kind of emotional driving force to be the characters. So I really focused on fleshing the characters out. And ultimately, as much as it is a very political comic book series that does deal with subjects as fascism and nationalism and American iconography a lot, and kind of critiques it, ultimately I want it to be the emotional driving force, to be your investment in the characters, good and bad, and to see them, the journey they go on, the relationships they form, and how they grow as people, really. And that's what I want it to really be about. And yeah, so if you like sci-fi, if you like pulp, if you like seeing Nazis brutally murdered, but you also want something that's got character and depth, but is silly and will make you laugh and cry, then give it a read, I guess.
And then I thought, you know, with this made up character, that what I wanted to do was sort of show my journey of becoming this woman, so that I could make beautiful, empathic work. But within that journey, I began to sexualize myself, therefore becoming a failure or whatever. So, you know, a lot of my work is always sort of built up about not being good enough, being a failure, but also it's all very tongue in cheek. So, and I mean, there's some really quick sketches I was doing very early on, because I just wanted to kind of, it was me pretend, the made up character of me was kind of like, yeah, look, I am a woman, but it was obviously, they were taken from really sort of tacky, horrible kind of Reader's Wives-esque images, but then put in my face, kind of like, but showing myself as being a woman. But it was kind of, and again, just on so many different levels, I kind of liked it, because there was almost this other side of it that, you know, looking at it, you know, you're sort of looking at it, and you not that you'd obviously get aroused by looking at that, but that was the whole thing, you know, be looking, oh, look at this, and then you move up to the face, and there's this bearded, bespectacled, ugly old man staring back at you, and there's kind of that weird, I don't know, I just liked that sort of messed up journey. And I also liked the sort of playing with sort of erotic material alongside children, because especially when you look at these sort of 1950s, because it's all very innocent, but you look at today, and like kids today can get their hands on the most obscene graphic pornography on their mobile phone. Whereas when I was a kid, you know, I'd be scrabbling around the bushes, walking along a canal, trying to find some copy of like Men Only or sort of Reader's Wives, and it would be completely tame, you know, and it's ridiculous how difficult that would be, that sort of journey, as it were. So, and that's why I kind of like just playing with this whole idea of me being the person that I am, perhaps ogling or whatever. I don't know, because every time I think about it in a completely different way. Every time I sort of work on it, I think, no, but this means this as well, or it means that, or it can be read this way, and I've in some ways lost, maybe partly, the original reason that I started on this journey, but it's just taken me off into sort of so many really interesting places. And this is kind of, and at the moment, and the newest thing, which is doing these great big kind of almost Toulouse-Lautrec-esque posters of just covers of Penthouse magazines. There'll be Penthouse. I want to do a load of Penthouse, Men Only, Playboy, but all from the 1950s and 60s. But you know, I'm not a painter, so I'm not. I don't know. So I'm just making it up as I go along. I can't, you know. But again, it will just always be my face looking back out at you, and I don't know. So that's where I am now. Just enjoying looking at sort of 1950s vintage pornography.